The high plains of the Dakota Territory kept their truths buried deep, sealed beneath grit, wind, and old blood. This was never a tale of spotless lawmen or helpless women waiting to be saved. It was the story of Elowen Ash, a widowed healer with steady hands, forced by a crooked sheriff to preserve the life of a man her town had already condemned as a monster. He was a wounded Apache warrior, a captive marked for the noose. Yet within the hushed walls of her isolated cabin, another kind of story began to take shape. One built from murmured words, shared suffering, and a perilous bond. What unfolded there did more than spare a single life. It sparked the rise of a legend who would one day come back to reclaim everything, beginning with her. The dust of Redemption Gulch clung to all things alike. A fine red grit that filmed window ledges, spoiled the water in the barrel, and stained the black mourning dress Elowen Ash had worn for 2 long years. The town honored only half its name. There was plenty of gulch, but mercy was scarce. For Elowen, the place was a kind of limbo. Since her husband, Caleb Ash, had been carried off by fever, she lived on the margins, the quiet widow in a small cabin by the creek, known for herbs, poultices, and remedies whispered down through years. She was tolerated for her usefulness, never truly accepted. The moment her world cracked apart did not come with gunfire, but with the slow, deliberate thunder of hooves approaching, too measured for a traveler, too heavy to ignore. Elowen was grinding horehound, its sharp medicinal bite filling her neat cabin, when shadows stretched across her doorway. Merrow Kane, the sheriff, stood there, filling the frame. He looked like a man shaped by stone and appetite. His face bore the scars of a hard life, his silver badge the only thing that caught the light. Behind him stood 2 deputies, Jude Rawlins and Orson Pike, flanking a horse. Slumped over its saddle, wrists bound, was a man. An Apache man. His body told a story of violence. A blood-darkened wrap was tied rough around his thigh. Another soaked through the buckskin on his shoulder. His long black hair was tangled with sweat and dust. Even unconscious, there was something fierce about him. A presence that made the air inside Elowen's cabin feel charged. Kane's voice scraped like gravel. "Get your things. You've got work to do." Elowen's hands froze over the mortar.
"Sheriff, I treat fevers and set simple breaks," she said carefully. "That man needs a doctor. Elliot Crane is 2 days' ride away in Fort Laramie."
Kane stepped inside, and the room seemed to shrink around him. "I don't have 2 days," he said flatly. "I need this one breathing."
"What for?"
The question slipped out before she could stop herself, a mistake she knew the instant his eyes narrowed. "He's my leverage," Kane said. "Name's Sacco. Led a war party that hit the Blackwood stage.
We caught him. The rest scattered."
"He knows where they're hiding. He knows where they plan to meet, and he's going to tell me."
Kane smiled, a thin, ugly cut through his beard. "But he's useless to me dead." The meaning hung thick in the air. Kane didn't want the man healed, only kept alive enough to be broken.
"I won't,"
Elowen whispered, staring at the bloodied figure on the horse. Not a man, not to them, just a tool. Kane took another step, his hand resting near his gun. "You're confused, Mrs. Ash. This isn't a favor. You're alone out here. I tolerate you because you were Caleb's wife, but tolerance snaps easy. You'll keep him alive in this cabin until I'm ready to talk to him. Rawlins and Pike will stay outside. Nobody comes in, nobody leaves." "You try anything," he added, voice cold and steady, "and the next soul needing a healer in this town will be you." The threat landed, clean and final. Fear cut through the numb shell Elowen had lived inside since her husband died. She glanced past Kane to the deputies. Rawlins, young and uneasy, wouldn't meet her eyes. Pike spat tobacco into the dirt. There would be no help. She had no choice. They dragged the wounded man inside, it took both deputies, and laid him on Caleb's old bed, the one she hadn't slept in since the fever took him. The cabin filled with the smell of blood, leather, and the raw earth of the plains. They cut the ropes from his wrists. His hands fell limp. "If he wakes, you scream," Kane ordered. "If he moves, you scream." "And if we have to come back in," he said, pausing at the door, "he won't be the only one bleeding. Understand?" Elowen nodded, her throat too tight for words. The door shut, sealing the cabin in a heavy, watchful silence. She was alone with him. For a long moment she couldn't move, her heart pounding hard enough to drown out thought. This was the enemy she'd heard about since childhood, the fear used to keep children obedient and men armed. But as she looked at him now, those stories unraveled. Beneath the blood and bruises lay not a monster, but a man torn open by violence, hovering between life and death. The healer in her stirred, quiet, insistent, stronger than fear, stronger than the sheriff's threats. Elowen lit another lantern. Warm light spilled over sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, a face younger than she'd expected. He could not have been much older than she was. She drew a steady breath and stepped closer. This was her ground. She cut away the stiff, blood-caked buckskin and saw the wounds clearly. A deep blade gash in his shoulder, angry and swollen, and worse still, a bullet lodged deep in his thigh. His skin burned with fever. She boiled water, laid out clean cloth, mixed yarrow and comfrey. Her hands stopped shaking as she worked, movements precise, practiced. When she cleaned the shoulder wound, he groaned low in his chest. His eyes opened. They were dark, like wet soil after rain, clouded with pain, but clear. They fixed on her, studying her. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them. He did not fight, did not reach for her. He simply endured, jaw clenched, watching her with a sharp, measuring calm. Elowen worked in silence, binding his wounds, pressing the poultice into torn flesh. She lifted his head and made him drink willow bark tea, her grip sure. His gaze never left her face. When she finished, exhaustion swept over her. She stepped back, realizing she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. She had not just followed orders. She had chosen to save him. Outside, boots crunched past the window. Elowen understood then what she had become. A prisoner in her own home, guarding a man the law wanted shattered. She had been forced to take him in, but the act of healing him, that was her own. And deep in her bones, she knew it would cost her dearly. The healer within Elowen Ash, the part of her fluent in the language of pain, rose to the surface. It was an instinct stronger than fear, stronger than Marrow Kane's threats. With unsteady fingers, she lit a second lantern. Warm light spilled across the man's face, carving out the hard planes of his cheekbones, the firm line of his jaw, a mouth set with quiet resolve even in unconsciousness. He was younger than she had imagined, perhaps near her own age, not yet 30. She drew a steady breath and began. His buckskin shirt had hardened with dried blood. When she cut it away, the damage revealed itself. A deep gash in his shoulder, swollen and angry. It was a blade wound, not lead. The injury in his thigh was far worse. A bullet had ripped through muscle, and the crude wrapping had barely slowed the bleeding. Heat rolled off him in waves. Fever. Elowen gathered her tools, set water to boil, laid out clean linen, mixed salves of yarrow and comfrey. Her hands, shaking moments before, steadied as focus took hold. This was where she belonged. As she cleaned the wounds, she worked with calm precision, gentle but unwavering.
When she flushed the shoulder cut, he groaned. A low sound pulled from deep in his chest. His eyes fluttered open. They were not the wild, hate-filled eyes she had been taught to expect. They were dark as rain-soaked soil, clouded by pain yet clear, aware. They found hers and held. For a brief heartbeat, the world narrowed. No cabin, no sheriff, no war party. Only two people bound by pain and necessity. One suffering, the other trying to pull him back from the edge.
In his gaze, she saw not a savage, but sharp intelligence, defiance burning beneath the hurt. He was weighing her, reading her intent. He did not resist. He did not reach for her. He endured, jaw locked tight against the pain her hands stirred. Elowen worked without words, movements efficient and sure. She packed the wounds with poultice, the clean bite of yarrow mixing with the copper scent of blood, then bound them tight with fresh cloth. She lifted his head and pressed willow bark tea to his lips to fight the fever. He swallowed, throat working, eyes never leaving hers. When it was finished, she stepped back, muscles aching from concentration. Only then did she realize she had been holding her breath. The rush drained away, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion and a colder fear. She had done more than tend a wound. She had crossed a boundary. By treating him with care, with dignity, she had defied what Marrow Kane wanted. She had chosen a side without speaking a word. As she watched his breathing slow and deepen, sleep finally claiming him, the weight of that choice settled on her shoulders. Kane wanted him alive only long enough to break him. Elowen was trying to save him. Those aims could never exist together. Outside, the shadow of Orson Pike slid past the window. She was trapped inside her own home, keeper of a man her people called an enemy, a piece on a board she could not yet see. She had been forced to shelter him, but the act of healing had been hers alone, and something inside her warned it would demand a terrible price. The days blurred together, marked only by the rise and fall of the Apache's fever. Elowen moved through each hour in a haze. Her world shrank to the cabin walls. Twice a day, Jude Rawlins left food and fresh water on the porch. She never opened the door until his footsteps faded. The silent watch outside hemmed her in like a fence. Within it, a quiet understanding grew between patient and healer. Kane had spat the name Sako, but to her, he was simply the man. He spoke little, his voice rough when he asked for water in broken English, but his eyes carried whole conversations. They followed her as she worked, filled with suspicion, pain, cautious curiosity. She learned his patterns, the tightening of his jaw before pain crested, the slight tremor in his hand when fever rose. He learned hers. He saw the weariness etched into her face, the moments when her gaze drifted to the empty chair near the hearth, Caleb Ash's chair, and her expression hollowed. On the third day, the fever broke. She was cooling his face with damp cloth when his eyes opened, clear and sharp. The delirium was gone. "The bullet," he said, voice stronger than she expected. "It is still in my leg." Elowen stilled. She had always known. She could feel the lead buried deep, but she lacked both the tools and training to remove it. Trying could cripple or kill him. "I can't take it out," she said quietly. "It needs a surgeon's blade. I'm only a healer." He studied her,
gaze intense. This sheriff, Kane, he will bring a doctor. Elowen shook her head, a bitter sound escaping her. No, he wants you breathing, but not whole. He wanted you broken, kept weak.
A flicker of understanding, maybe even grim respect, crossed Sako's eyes. He grasped his reality without illusion. Bracing on his elbows, he lifted himself, pain flashing across his face. My name is Sako. The name carried weight, spoken like a declaration rather than an introduction. I'm Elowen Ash, she replied, giving her own name in return. The exchange was formal, deliberate, an acknowledgement that they were more than captor and captive. Elowen, he repeated, shaping the sound carefully. You gave me water. You cleaned my wounds. It's what I do, she said evenly. I heal. You heal your enemy. His gaze did not waver. The question lingered between them. Was he her enemy? The legend of a ruthless Apache warrior did not match the injured man lying in Caleb Ash's bed, his life resting in her hands. You were hurt and brought to my door, she answered with care. Why you're here is between you and the sheriff. Being wounded, that's between you and me. He seemed to accept that, settling back against the pillow. But something had changed. They were no longer silent strangers. They were Elowen Ash and Sako, two people confined within the same dangerous snare. The following afternoon, a hard knock struck the door. Not the cautious tap of Jude Rawlins. Elowen's heart jumped into her throat. Sako's eyes flew open, his hand moving instinctively to his injured side. Mrs. Ash, Marrow. Kane's voice cut through the wood, sharp and impatient. Open up, I'm coming in. Panic surged. Elowen glanced back at Sako. His face had gone still, unreadable, but his eyes burned cold. She crossed the room, hands trembling, and lifted the latch. Kane pushed inside, bringing with him the stink of whiskey and trail dust. His gaze went straight to the bed, taking in Sako's alert stare, the clean bindings, the pallor that spoke of blood loss but not death. Well now, Kane sneered. Looks like our little healer earned her keep. He almost looks human. Kane stepped closer, staring down at Sako, who returned the look without flinching. Ready to talk yet? Sako said nothing. Kane laughed, harsh and pleased. Don't worry, that'll change. Just need you on your feet first. He turned back to Elowen. How's the leg? Bullet still inside? Yes, she said tightly. It needs to come out or it'll rot. Let it rot, Kane shrugged. A man with a limp is easier to chain. Just keep him breathing. His eyes drifted around the cabin, the stacked firewood, the swept floor, claiming it all. You're doing fine, Elowen. Maybe when this is over, you'll earn a proper place in town. A man like Jude Rawlins could use a wife, he added casually. Quiet, obedient. The threat rang clear as a gunshot. Her future, her safety, hung on obedience. Anger flared, but she swallowed it, offering only a shallow nod. Satisfied, Kane turned for the door. Then he paused. Don't get ideas. Don't think because he's awake you're friends. He'd cut your throat soon as he'd look at you. And you, Kane said, jerking his chin towards Sako, remember, her life's in your hands. You move wrong, she pays. The door slammed. Silence crashed down after him, heavy and sour. Elowen leaned against the wood, her knees shaking. She was trapped, by the men outside and by Kane's cruelty. He had turned her into Sako's shield and his hostage. He lies. Sako's voice broke the quiet. She turned. His calm mask was gone,
replaced by controlled fury. "The Blackwood stage," he said slowly. "My people did not attack it." Elowen stared. "The sheriff. Everyone saw the bodies." "There was a fight," Sako replied, eyes distant. "We found the stage already torn apart. Guards dead." "Cheyenne raiders," he continued. "Old enemies. We drove them off. We took the strong box to return it, to show peace with the fort. A new treaty."
His gaze sharpened as it locked onto hers. Then Kane and his men arrived. They saw us with the box and the dead. They opened fire without a word. His jaw tightened. It was a trap. Elowen's thoughts spun hard. Sako's account clashed with everything she had been fed, yet it rang true. Merrill Kane was no lawman chasing justice. He was a scavenger who had found blood in the dirt and bent it to his will. Or worse. "Why?" she breathed. "Gold," Sako said, watching her closely, his voice steady and bleak. "There are rumors of it in the hills north of here. Land promised to my people by treaty." "A treaty is paper," he went on. "War tears paper apart. War brings the army. The army drives us off. Then the land is open for men like him." The truth snapped into place with sickening clarity. Kane didn't want to hunt a war party. He meant to invent one. He needed Sako to confess, to light a blaze across the territory, a blaze he could sift through later for gold. Elowen studied Sako and saw more than a wounded man. She saw the hinge of a ruthless design, and she, Elowen Ash, the quiet widow, had been ordered to keep that hinge alive for the gallows. That night, sleep refused her. She sat in the rocker, counting the slow rise and fall of Sako's chest in the moonlight. The cabin's whispers were no longer only pain and care. They carried lies, plots, and a danger far larger than a single captive. She was no longer just his healer. She was his sole witness. And witnesses did not survive schemes like Kane's. The weight of Kane's betrayal settled heavy in her gut. Every threat, every sneer, every watchful pass by the deputies outside took on new meaning. She wasn't sheltering a prisoner. She was caught in a machine built to grind the Apache people into dust for profit. And her own life was tangled in its gears. In the days that followed, a silent pact took shape. Unspoken but present, in the way Sako shared what he knew of Kane's men, their routines, their numbers. In the way Elowen mapped the town for him, measured distances to the livery, noted the hours when vigilance slackened. They were no longer patient and nurse. They were co-conspirators. Sako's strength returned, maddeningly slow. The bullet in his thigh throbbed without mercy. He worked the muscles from the bed, small, brutal exercises to fight the wasting. Sweat soaked him. His face went gray. He never complained. Elowen watched, her chest tight with fear and respect. She was nursing him back to the strength he would need to flee, an act that would betray the sheriff who held her life in his fist. "The younger one," Sako said one evening, voice low. They spoke only after dusk, when shadows stretched long and the world beyond the cabin receded. "The deputy, Rollins. He doesn't have a killer's eyes," Sako said. Elowen nodded, mending one of Caleb Ash's old shirts, grateful for the steady work. "He's a farm boy from back east." "I think," she added softly, "he's afraid of Kane." "Fear can be used," Sako said, staring up at the ceiling. "Or it can break you." He began to teach her, not with grand speeches, but with practical truths. He showed her how to read the wind by the drift of chimney smoke. He gave her Apache words, water, bread, and told her Yarrow's name among his people, the medicine for wounds. She gave him her world in return. She spoke of Caleb, his kindness, his belief in building a life instead of stripping the land bare. She told Saco about Ohio, green hills, gentle rain, a place that felt impossibly distant from this scorched frontier. As they spoke, old walls of fear and prejudice crumbled. She learned to see the land through his eyes, not as emptiness to be conquered, but as sacred ground, every stone and stream holding a story. He in turn saw her not as a nameless settler, but as Elowen Ash, a woman of quiet resolve, hands made to heal, spirit unbroken by grief. The shift came a week after Kane's visit. Jude Rollins brought the supplies as usual, but lingered this time. "Ma'am," he said, voice tight. He wouldn't meet her eyes, staring at the worn boards of her porch. The sheriff's getting restless.
He's been drinking, Rollins continued, talking about moving the prisoner to the jail for proper questioning.
The words were ice cold. Proper questioning meant rope and hot iron, pain Elowen's sabs could never touch.
"Thank you for telling me, Mr. Rollins," she said quietly.
He finally looked up, conflict written across his young face.
Caleb Ash was a good man. He didn't believe in the way Kane runs things. Be careful, ma'am."
Jude Rollins turned and left before Elowen could answer. That night, the air inside the cabin felt heavy, charged with unspoken urgency. Elowen passed Rollins' warning to Saco. He listened, his features hardening like carved stone. With a sharp hiss of pain, he swung his legs off the bed, weight settling onto the wounded thigh. Using the bedpost for balance, he forced himself upright, his body shaking with the strain.
"I can't face him like this," Saco said, frustration tight in his voice.
"Then you can't go to the jail," Elowen replied. "We have to remove the bullet." It was no longer a discussion. It was necessity. "It's poisoning you. It's what's keeping you weak." "You said you couldn't," he reminded her. "I said I'm not a doctor," she corrected quietly. "But I've seen it done. My father was a butcher before he was a farmer. I know how to handle a blade. It will hurt. It will be dangerous."
"If you cut wrong," he began. "The other choice is Merrow Cane," she finished. "There is no choice."
The decision settled between them, final and unyielding. They would do it the following night, when the moon was gone and darkness lay thick over the land. Escape was no longer a distant hope. It was a plan. And this was its first terrible step. Elowen spent the day preparing. She boiled her sharpest skinning knife, tweezers, and strips of clean linen until the metal burned her fingers.
She mixed a strong opium tincture, rare and precious, reserved for the worst pain, and crushed willow bark for the fever that would surely come. Fear sat like ice in her stomach. She was about to cut deliberately into living flesh, guided only by half-remembered sights from childhood. As dusk settled, Saco drank the bitter opium without complaint. She gave him a thick strip of leather to bite.
"You are a strong woman, Elowen Ash," he said, his words already softening, eyes dark and trusting as they held hers. "Stronger than you know." She drew a long breath, lantern light flashing along the knife's edge.
"Pray I'm strong enough."
Then she cut. Saco's body arched in a silent scream, knuckles bleaching white against the bed frame, the cabin filled with the sharp scent of fresh blood. By unsteady light, heart pounding, Elowen probed the wound. Sweat stung her eyes.
time warped.
There was only steel against flesh, the frantic search for the foreign weight buried inside. Then, contact, the dull scrape of metal on metal. "I have it," she whispered, barely audible. With painstaking care, she guided the tweezers in, clamped the misshapen lead, and pulled. It tore free with a sickening sound. Sako cried out, then went slack as pain crashed over him. Elowen dropped the bloody bullet into a bowl. It rang loud in the silence. She worked fast now, cleaning the wound, packing it with willow poultice, binding it tight. Her hands shook, but they did not falter. When it was finished, she collapsed into the rocking chair, the knife still clutched in her fist. Sako lay unconscious, breath shallow and uneven. The room spun. She had done it. She had bound herself fully to his fate. There was no turning back. She wasn't only his healer now, she was his surgeon, his ally, his last chance. As she watched him sleep, a fierce, frightening resolve took root. This was no longer only about survival. It was about justice. Marrow Kane had tried to make a pawn of her. She would not let him win. Sako would walk free, or she would die trying. The 2 days after the crude surgery blurred together, whispered plans, grinding recovery. The opium was gone. Sako bore the pain in silence, jaw locked tight. The angry redness in his thigh faded. The fever broke. Fire returned to his eyes. The fire of a man readying himself. They knew Kane wouldn't wait much longer. Rawlins's warning had bought time, nothing more. The plan was simple, desperate, and depended on too many chances. The guards, Rawlins and Orson Pike, were creatures of routine. At midnight, Pike would leave his post to wake Rawlins on the far edge of town. For 5 minutes, maybe 10, the cabin would be unwatched. That was their window. "The creek," Sako rasped, pointing toward the rear of the cabin. "It runs deep behind your home. The water will swallow our sound." They would need a distraction, something to pull eyes away at the moment that mattered most. "The livery," Elowen said, her thoughts racing. "Bart Hale's livery. It's packed with dry hay." A lantern knocked over by accident. The idea was reckless. Fire was the deepest terror of any frontier town. But it was the only distraction, loud and fierce enough to drag every eye in Redemption Gulch away from the cabin. On the 3rd night after the surgery, a storm gathered. The air pressed heavy against the land, and distant thunder rolled in from the west. It felt like a mercy from whatever watched over the desperate. As the town slipped into a restless, pre-storm sleep, Elowen made her final preparations. She packed a small satchel, what remained of her healing supplies, a loaf of bread, and a skin of water. She pulled on her strongest boots and Caleb Ash's old canvas coat. It hung loose on her shoulders, but it was warm and tough. Sako was already ready. He had torn strips from his blanket and wrapped them around his feet to deaden his steps. He walked with a heavy limp, but every movement was controlled. He had carved a crude handle for the skinning knife she had used on him, turning it into a weapon meant for survival. The tension inside the cabin felt alive. They waited in darkness, listening as thunder crept closer. Then came the crunch of Orson Pike's boots as he started toward the edge of town to wake Jude Rawlins. Their window had opened. "Are you ready?" Sako whispered beside her. "No," Elowen answered truthfully. "But I'm going." A faint smile flashed in the dark. "That is the same thing." Elowen slipped out the front door, her heart hammering. The night was pitch black beneath the roiling clouds. She hugged the cabin's edge, moving through the deepest shadows. Redemption Gulch was nothing but crooked shapes against a darker sky. Only the saloon glowed, dull yellow light leaking through its windows. She moved like a memory, every step mapped by years lived on the fringe. The livery stank of hay, manure, and old leather. The side door was never locked.
She slipped inside, swallowed by darkness. Her fingers searched for the lantern she knew Bart Hale kept on a peg, closing around cold metal. She struck a match. The sudden flare blinded her. Her hand shook so badly the lantern rattled. Setting a fire, even a small one, felt like an unforgivable sin. Then she pictured Marrow Kane's smile. She pictured Sako twisted in pain. Her resolve hardened. She set the lantern atop a pile of loose hay far from the stalls, drew a breath, and tipped it over.
The flame caught instantly, devouring the straw with a hungry roar.
She didn't wait. She ran, lungs burning, retracing her path. By the time she reached the cabin, an orange glow bled over the rooftops, and the first shout of "Fire!" split the night. Sako waited at the back window, the wooden shutter already pried loose. He pulled her through, his grip firm. They didn't look back. They plunged into the darkness behind the cabin, toward the sound of rushing water. The fire was their shield.
Shouts and panicked cries echoed from town. Every able-bodied man, including Kane's deputies, would be racing toward the flames. The creek bank was steep and slick. Sako went first, half sliding, half climbing to the water. He turned and reached for her. Elowen followed, boots sinking into mud. The water was brutally cold, stealing her breath as it surged around her knees. They moved downstream, letting the current erase their tracks. The pull of the creek fought them.
Sako braced himself against the bank, favoring his wounded leg, forcing each step through sheer will. Behind them, the fire painted the storm clouds a violent orange. It felt like running from the end of the world. After a quarter mile, Sako found what he sought. A dense stand of willows growing low over the water. He forced a path through, holding branches aside. They collapsed on the far side, hidden, shaking with cold and adrenaline. Soaked, exhausted, but free. From their cover they saw torches darting through town. The livery burned like a beacon. They had done it. Fat, cold raindrops began to fall, turning dust to mud. The storm broke at last, washing away scent, footprints, every trace they'd ever been there. Sako turned to her, his face barely visible. He brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek, his touch unexpectedly gentle. "You have the heart of a warrior," he said. "Elowen Ash,"
he added, his voice heavy with respect that warmed her more than fire ever could. In that moment, she was no longer a forgotten widow of Redemption Gulch. She was a fugitive, an arsonist, an ally to a man the world called a savage. Elowen glanced back at the wild, burning glow of the town she had abandoned, then forward into the vast, storm-churned darkness of the plains. She had never felt such fear, or such fierce aliveness.
The wilderness was a brutal refuge, unforgiving yet honest. The storm that masked their escape turned the grasslands into a mire of mud, but it also filled dry gullies with fresh water. For days they traveled by night, hiding in cutbanks and cottonwood thickets by day. Sako, who had been a caged force in her cabin, changed utterly. Out here, he belonged. He moved with quiet authority, his limp always present, but never ruling him. He showed Elowen how to find north by the stars, how to recognize edible roots, how to place a foot so softly the prairie dogs barely stirred. She answered in kind, tending his leg as it healed, gathering creekside herbs to make fresh poultices.
They became a pair, forged by danger and a growing, unspoken closeness. The road stripped away pretense. They saw one another raw and human, huddled together against the cutting night wind, sharing the last of their bread, faces streaked with dirt and fatigue. In those still moments, their bond deepened beyond strategy. It lived in the way he offered her the first drink from a new spring, and in the way she reached for him without thinking when his leg faltered. Love, she learned, didn't always announce itself with fine words or grand vows.
Sometimes it took root like a tough plains flower, fed by small kindnesses and mutual respect. After a week, Sako found the signs he sought. A snapped arrow shaft set just so, a careful pattern of stones on a ridge. He was guiding them to his people. Not a great camp, but scattered bands broken by the army and by the schemes of men like Marrow Kane. They reached the first group in a hidden canyon, what remained of a proud nation. A handful of families, elders, women, and children, faces hollowed by hunger and worry. Their leader was an aged, weary man named Rokan. Suspicion turned to disbelief when they recognized Sako, believed dead or long taken. Sako did not begin with his own suffering. He spoke of the trap at the Blackwood stage, of Kane's design to steal their land. He told them of the woman, Elowen, who had saved his life at risk to her own. Elowen stood beside him under the weight of many dark, measuring eyes. She was an outsider, a white woman, yet named as a savior. Sako's plan shifted everything. Kane expected the Apache to answer with raids to fit the savagery he preached. That would summon the army, his true aim. "We will not fight his war," Sako declared, his voice carrying a new authority. "We will expose it." His legend did not begin with bloodshed, but with guile. Scouts brought word of a government shipment, blankets, flour, salt, headed to the agency at the territory's edge. Guarded, but lightly. More troubling, a rival Apache band led by the hot-headed Kor planned to raid it out of desperation. Kor's people distrusted Sako and believed only violence could answer violence. Kane knew of the raid. Worse, he had fed it with lies and promises, carried by a half-blood traitor named Silas Crow. An attack on government goods would shatter the peace and force open war. Sako moved fast. With a small group from Rokan's camp, he did not strike the shipment. He intercepted Kor's war party instead. Steel met steel in a tense stand. Two bands facing one another, weapons drawn. Sako chose words. He laid out Kane's design piece by piece, showing how Kor had been used. He named Crow as Kane's agent. Proud and bristling, Kor refused to believe him. "You speak with the tongue of the white woman who follows you," Kor sneered. Then Elowen stepped forward. Her heart pounded, but her voice held. She spoke not of treaties or gold, but of what she had witnessed. Kane's greed, the way he spoke of Apache lives as tools and keys. She spoke plainly, honestly, and one of Rokan's men translated. Coming from an enemy, her words carried a strange force. Still, doubt lingered, until proof arrived. Sako had sent scouts ahead. They returned dragging Silas Crow, seized while riding to meet Kane's men, who waited nearby to save the shipment after the raid, eager to pose as witnesses to Apache aggression. Cornered, Crow confessed everything. That day marked Sako's true ascent. He stopped a raid that would have ignited war, unmasked a traitor, and, most crucial, saved Kor and his warriors from riding into slaughter. He proved that wisdom could stand stronger than rage. Humbled and shaken, Kor bowed his head and swore loyalty to Sako. With the two bands united,
Word raced across the plains like wind-fed fire. Sako was not dead. He had returned not only as a warrior, but as a leader with vision. He was called the Crow's Voice, a man who spoke of another path, a way to confront enemies not with arrows alone, but with patience and wit. Elowen watched the change with quiet wonder.
The wounded man who had once lain in her cabin was becoming something larger, his name spoken with growing reverence. He carried himself differently now. The limp remained, but it no longer marked weakness. It told a story of survival. One evening, seated by a fire at the heart of the swelling encampment, he turned to her. Firelight traced the strong planes of his face. "In my world," he said softly, "a name is a path. I am Sako, the Crow's Voice. But you have no name among us." He took her hand. His was rough and steady, hers smaller yet firm. "They call you the White Healer," he went on. "That is what you do, not who you are." "I name you Wiyawa, my heart." "You saved the heart in my chest," he said, "and you have taken it." He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of hunger, but of deep recognition, the seal of a bond forged in fear, pain, and shared deliverance. Under the wide, star-filled sky of the Dakota Plains, Elowen understood she was no longer merely running with him. She was home. But a legend once born must be tested, and the man who had unknowingly forged it, Marrow Kane, still ruled Redemption Gulch, growing bolder in his certainty that his enemies were gone. Autumn winds swept the high country, carrying pine and the warning of snow. Sako's encampment expanded. News of his survival and cunning drew families from hiding, warriors weary of futile raids, and elders who sensed a new chance. He was no longer a fugitive. He was the center of a unified Apache force, fragile but alive. Yet their strength rested on thin ground. Winter loomed, and they lived on what they could hunt. Worse still, the lie of the Blackwood stage massacre remained. In army ledgers at Fort Laramie, Sako and his people were still branded as killers, a poison that would eventually destroy them. "We cannot live as ghosts," Sako said during council. "Kane's lie must be cut out, like the bullet from my leg." The council split. Many, including Kor, argued for a direct strike on Redemption Gulch, to burn it as Elowen had burned the livery. "An eye for an eye leaves us blind," Sako replied, calm and unyielding. "We will return, but not as a war party. We will return as the truth." His plan was daring. He would not attack the town. He would encircle it. He would not seek blood, but justice. The confrontation would not be fought on a battlefield, but in the open view of the people. Elowen stood at his side, no longer an outsider. She had learned the basics of the Apache tongue, and the women had taught her how to serve as Wiyawa, his heart. Her counsel carried weight. She understood the town better than any of them. "They are afraid," she told him as they planned. "Kane rules with fear and lies. Give them another story, a believable one, and some will listen. Men like Jude Rawlins," she added. "Maybe even Elliot Crane, if he finds his courage." Their proof would be the traitor Silas Crow. The day of return broke cold and gray. 100 warriors rode with Sako, not painted for war, but for solemn reckoning. They did not charge or shout. They emerged onto the ridges overlooking Redemption Gulch, taking silent positions that cut off the road. It was a siege of presence, not violence. Panic rippled through town. Men seized rifles, women pulled children inside, doors barred, shutters slammed. Redemption Gulch held its breath. Kane rode out, flanked by Orson Pike and a visibly shaken Rawlins, fury masking his fear. He had believed Sacco dead. Seeing him alive, at the head of a disciplined force, hit Kane like a blow.
Sacco rode forward with Elowen at his side and Kor beside him. They stopped 100 yards out, a deliberate gulf between them. Sacco held a length of rope, Silas Crow bound at its end. "Sheriff Kane," Sacco called. The crow's voice carried across the open ground, clear and commanding. "You have been telling stories about me." Merrow Kane's hand slid to his gun. "Looks like the coyotes let their pet savage off the leash," he snarled. "You're a wanted man, Sacco. You and your band of killers surrender now, and I'll see you get a quick hanging." "I am not here to surrender," Sacco called back, his voice steady. "I am here for a trial, for the murder of the men on the Blackwood stage. We will have it now, before your people and mine." He shoved Silas Crow forward, forcing him to his knees in the dust. "And I have brought a witness." The sight of the bound traitor, pale, shaking, sent confusion rippling through the armed townsmen behind Kane. This was not the simple tale of savages at the gate they had been promised. "He's a liar!" Kane bellowed, his control cracking. "He'll say anything to save his own hide." "Then let the people decide," Sacco challenged. "Let Crow speak. Then you will speak, and then I will speak. Let the truth stand in the open." This was Sacco's snare, woven not of arrows and knives, but of words and honor. He was betting that even in a place as rotten as Redemption Gulch, truth still carried weight. He was daring Kane before the very people he ruled. Elowen watched Kane's face and saw panic flare, the desperation of a cornered rat. He could not allow this. He could not let Crow talk. "This is my town!" Kane roared, losing himself at last. He drew his pistol. "I am the law here, and the law says you hang." He did not aim at Sacco. He aimed at Elowen Ash. It was a calculated cruelty. She was the hinge, the white woman whose presence gave Sacco's words power. Kill her, and the most dangerous witness vanished. Prove Sacco could not protect his own. Time slowed. Elowen saw the barrel flash, the tightening finger on the trigger. And another shot cracked, closer, sharper. Kane staggered, disbelief flooding his face. He looked down at the spreading red on his chest, then up at the man beside him. Jude Rawlins stood there, pistol smoking, his young face pale and set. He had chosen. Kane collapsed into the dust. The frozen silence shattered. The siege ended. The reckoning began. Gunfire erupted as Orson Pike and Kane's loyalists fired in panic. Sacco's warriors answered, not with fury, but with discipline, cutting down the men who had upheld Kane's corruption. Smoke and thunder filled the street. Elowen did not hide. She moved through the chaos as a force of mercy, tearing strips from her own clothes to bind wounds, Apache and townsmen alike, her courage a bright signal amid the haze. The fight was brief. Rawlins shouted for a ceasefire. Seeing the truth laid bare, the townsfolk faltered and dropped their guns. In the ringing quiet that followed, justice moved swiftly. Sacco dragged Silas Crow before the gathered town and the arriving army patrol. Crow's confession laid the whole scheme bare, Kane's lies, the trap, the manipulation, confirmed by Rawlins. Sacco's name was cleared, and the groundwork for real peace was set upon the ashes of Kane's greed. When Sacco's people prepared to depart, he dismounted and went to Elowen, taking her hands before all. "You were forced to take in a wounded man," he declared, his voice carrying down the silent street. But you healed a nation. He turned to his people and named her Wiawa, my heart. Then he faced the town. I am their leader. His voice rang with authority and with love. And she is their queen. He lifted Elowen onto his horse.
Together they rode toward the open plains, no longer fugitive and healer, but the legendary king and queen of the high country. And so the story of Elowen Ash and Sako was etched into the history of the plains, a tale born not of fantasy, but of grit, desperation, and an unexpected love that defined the true Wild West. It reminds us that legends are not born. They are forged in hardship. That the greatest strength lies in the courage to heal rather than to hate. And that even where worlds collide, something new can take root. A testament that, even in the dustiest corners of history, love and justice can still bloom. Thank you for listening. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover, visuals, scripts, as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans to ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality. We fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.